Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be ranking every NFL team after the 2023-2024 season. So, obviously, as you can see, this will be done in a tier list. And briefly going over the tiers, at the top, we have the elite teams, the best of the best. Then we have the great teams. They aren't quite elite, but still really, really good. Then, under that, we got the good teams, teams who are better than solid, but not quite great. Then we got the teams who are decent, then below average, not quite decent, but not terrible. And then finally, we've got the teams who are just awful. So, starting things off with the Saints. So they weren't great. They weren't terrible. They went 9-8 this season. They played in a really easy division, which gave them some free wins. I'm gonna put them in a decent, although they're right there between decent and below average. Next team we have is the Dolphins. So they're another team that is tough to rank because they started off the season great when they played some pretty easy teams, but as the season progressed, the level of competition increased. They weren't quite as good. They struggled down the stretch of the season and ended up losing in the wild card round. So I'm going to put them in good. I can understand the argument for great because they were very good to start the year, and also injuries were a big part of their downfall, but they're going in good. Next team we have is the Baltimore Ravens. So they're going to go in elite. They were one of the best teams in the NFL in the regular season. They went 13-4, won the AFC North, were the number one seed in the AFC. They even made the AFC Championship game. Now I know they didn't win, but they were still one of the best teams in the NFL this season, and they're going in the elite tier. Next team we have is the Cincinnati Bengals. So they're a weird team to rank. They finished 9-8. They didn't have Joe Burrow for a good chunk of the season. But Jake Browning was pretty good replacing Joe Burrow. The Bengals definitely weren't as good with Jake Browning, but they were still a decent team. They're a tough one to rank. I don't think they're quite the same level of the Dolphins, but I think they're a lot better than the Saints. But they're going to go in decent above the Saints. Next team is the Broncos. So they had a weird season. They finished 8-9, and they started off terrible. Then they won 5 games in a row, putting themselves back in playoff contention. Then they lost to the Patriots, and then they decided they didn't want to make the playoffs. They benched Russ so he didn't get hurt, and they obviously missed the playoffs. But they're going to go in decent, although I think they had the potential to be a playoff team if they didn't bench Russ because he was actually having a pretty good season. Next team we have is the Giants. So they had high expectations after showing or having a really surprising season last year, but they were really bad and obviously going in bad. As a result, they went just 6-11. Now, injuries were a big part of why they were so bad. Daniel Jones didn't play in 11 games between a neck injury and a torn ACL, and other players like Saquon Barkley, Andrew Thomas also missed time. But the Giants, they were not good, and they're in the bad tier. Next team we have is the Vikings. They're another weird team to rank because they weren't amazing, weren't terrible. Obviously, they lost Kirk Cousins midway through the season to a torn Achilles, and they finished just 7-10. But Kirk Cousins was playing at an elite level before he got hurt, and after he got hurt, the Viking quarterback play was terrible. They're between decent and below average. I'll give them below average. Next team we have is the Rams. So they're going in good. They were the definition of a good team this year. They went 10-7, exceeded preseason expectations, and the coaching staff did a great job developing late round picks, and they made the playoffs and had a good season. Next team is the Bucks. They're another team that exceeded preseason expectations, going 9-8. Baker Mayfield had a great season, and the Buccaneers even won a playoff game. I would say they're between decent and good, but they're going to go in good. Next team is the Lions. So they were a great team this year. They won a playoff game for the first time in 32 years. They won the NFC North for the first time since 1993. They had a great season, ended up one win away from the Super Bowl. Not quite elite, I feel, but still a great team. Next team we have is the Bears. They're going in below average. They weren't terrible, but weren't very good. They were good enough at the end of the season and showed some promise, so they're keeping Matt Eberflus as head coach, and they ended up finishing 7-10. They have a very interesting offseason ahead of them, especially at the quarterback position, but this season they were below average team. Next team is the 49ers. So they're going in elite. They made the Super Bowl, obviously didn't win it, but they were one of the best teams in the NFL all season long. Ended up making the Super Bowl, going to overtime in the Super Bowl. Brock Purdy showed he could be a good quarterback in the NFL, and the 49ers were an elite team. Next team we have is the Eagles. So they're a really weird team because if you could split the Eagles first half and second half, they're probably going in elite and below average, or elite and bad. The first half, they were great. They started off 10-1, and in the second half, they were terrible, going 1-5 in their last 6 games, and ended up losing in the first round of the playoffs. It's tough to rank the Eagles, but they're going to go in the top of good. Next team we got is the Raiders, another team who's tough to rank because they started off the season terrible, then fired Josh McDaniels. Got a little bit better as they went 5-4 after firing him. Ended up only finishing 8-9. They weren't good, but showed some promise late in the season. I think they made the right move by bringing back Antonio Pierce to be their full-time head coach. But overall, the season, the Raiders, I would say, were below average. Next team we have is the Packers. So the Packers were a good team. They went 9-8, destroyed the Cowboys in the playoffs, and I'm going to put them in the good tier, and makes things even more impressive when you consider the fact that they made the playoffs and even won a playoff game on the road with the youngest roster in the NFL. Packers, they definitely had a good season. Next team we have is the Commanders. They were bad. 4-13, not good. They lost to the Giants twice, and as a Giants fan, I know how bad the Giants were. So to lose them to them twice is just awful. But the Commanders' defense was the worst in the NFL. The offense was not much better, and the Commanders were just terrible. Next team is the Cardinals, another team going in bad. They went 4-13. Now expectations weren't that high. They were pretty competitive for how bad they were, but still a bad season and going in the bad tier. Next, we have the Steelers. They might be the weirdest team in the NFL. They weren't really that good, but as usual, they were above 500 and in playoff contention. Ended up making the playoffs at 10-7. And while their record says were probably good, I'm going to put them in decent, but at the very top of decent because they did make the playoffs. Next team is the Bills. So they were a great overall team. They started off slow, but once they fired offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey, they became a really good team. They're going to go in great because they fell short in the playoffs once again. And I think you need to be a team who have somewhat success in the playoffs to be elite, but they still had a great season and they go in great. Next team is the Falcons. They were definitely below average. They went 7-10. They weren't awful, but they weren't great. They were pretty bad offensively despite having some talent on that side of the ball. Now, Arthur Smith was a big problem. Now he's gone. But the Falcons, they were below average. Next team we have is the Seahawks. They're a tougher team to rank. They weren't great, weren't terrible. Ended up just short of the playoffs at 9-8. I could understand having them in good, but I'm going to put them in decent. Next team is the Patriots. They're going in bad. They were terrible. They won just 4 games, going 4-13, which is their fewest win total since the 1992 season when they won just 2 games. And this was a bad year for the Patriots, and next season will be the first time Bill Belichick is not their head coach this century. Next team we have is the Browns. So they had a weird year. A lot of injuries for the Browns, such as Deshaun Watson, Nick Chubb, and others going down early in the season. Yet the Browns still went 11-6 and made the playoffs uh, because of their defense and finding Joe Flacco off the streets who can still play at an elite level. The Browns are a borderline great team, but I'm going to put them at the very top of good. Next team we have the Texans. They were the most surprising team in the NFL this season, going from 3-13-1 to 10-7 and winning the AFC South, and they even won a playoff game. Now, like the Browns, they're a borderline great team. They're to go at the very top of good, and obviously over the Browns because that's who they beat in the playoffs. Moving on, we have the Chiefs. So they're going to go in elite. They didn't have an elite regular season, but obviously they won the Super Bowl, and how could you not have the Super Bowl champs in the elite tier? And even though they didn't have good good regular season success, and they had to play on the road in the playoffs, that didn't stop the Chiefs from being the first back-to-back Super Bowl champs since a Super Bowl's 38 and 39, which is 19 years. So obviously the Super Bowl champion is going to go in elite. Next team is the Cowboys. They're going to go in great. It's the same thing every year with the Cowboys. Great in the regular season, fall short in the playoffs. That's exactly what happened this year. And until they can find success in the playoffs, they're not going to be an elite team. They find themselves in great. Next team is the Chargers. So they were bad and obviously are going in bad tier. They went just 5-12 this season. They got rid of Brandon Staley, which alone might make me put him in below average. But injuries were a big part of why they were so bad, and just overall bad season for the Chargers at just 5-12. Next team is the Jets. So they're a below average team. They had a lot of hype going into the season after trading for Aaron Rodgers, and obviously Rodgers tore his Achilles 4 snaps into his Jets career. Now, the Jets defense was a reason they were competitive this year, and they were actually somewhat decent, not quite decent, but below average. But they weren't terrible thanks to their defense, but they still weren't very good. Jets in below average. Next team is the Panthers. They were the worst team in the NFL at 2-15. And I'm not just saying that because of their record. They were truly awful. They made some big moves in the offseason, hiring Frank Reich, trading for the number one pick, and drafting Bryce Young. Frank Reich didn't last the season, and Bryce Young had a terrible rookie year. The Panthers easily the worst team in the NFL, not even close. Moving on to the final three. First, we have the Titans. So they were between bad and below average. They went 6-11, won a lot of close games, so I'm going to put them in below average, but I could definitely understand the argument for having them in bad. Second to last team is the Colts. So they were a team that was very surprising, especially after Anthony Richardson got hurt. They were one win away from the playoffs with Gardner Minshew. They weren't a playoff team, but they were good, and I'm going to put them there. Although I could definitely understand having them indecent, but I'm going to give them good. And our final team is Jaguars. They had very high expectations coming into the season, lived up to the expectations to start the season, then fell off a cliff, lost 5 of their last 6 games to miss the playoffs, and Jaguars will end up indecent. But that is how I rank every NFL team after the 2023-2024 season, or how I rank them from their 2023-2024 season. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. Let me know in the comments if you agree, disagree, and why. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But thank you for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. And I'll see you in the next video.